on your digital radio. I'm Gianna Davison, covering for Nana today. And for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion, mine, theirs, and yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times disagreeing. Joining me today, it's author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and broadcaster Danny Kelly. But before we get started, here's your latest news headlines with Tatiana.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 4. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Archie Battersbee's family have lodged an appeal after losing a High Court bid to have him transferred to a hospice. The 12-year-old, who's on life support, has been in a coma since April. This morning, a judge ruled it was not in Archie's best interest to relocate him from the Royal London Hospital. His parents have pledged to fight to the end so he can spend his final moments with dignity. The two candidates vying for Tory party leader have clashed over UK's impending recession. The Bank of England has warned the country will face its longest recession since the financial crisis, as it increased the interest rate by half a percentage point to 1.75%. The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak claims his rival's economic plans would damage the country. But Liz Truss believes her measures can be taken to avoid a recession.
The reality is we are facing a recession if we carry on with our business as usual policies. We need to do more, and that's why I'm determined to reform the economy and keep taxes low. If there is a recession, that will mean people losing jobs, that will mean more economic hardship. So that is why it's so important that we do all we can to grow the economy.
Rishi Sunak says he wants to be honest with the country about the challenges ahead.
I'm not sitting here or standing here promising you tens and tens of billions of pounds of goodies straight away, because I don't think that's the right thing to do for our economy. I think it's risky. I think it risks making the inflation problem far worse and costing you all far more. I want to be straight with the country about the challenges we face and what is going to be required to fix them. And that's why I think you can trust me on this, because I'm prepared to do that, even though it's going to cost me politically.
Meanwhile, a video has emerged showing Mr Sunak telling a campaign event that as Chancellor, he diverted government funding from deprived urban areas towards more affluent towns. In a video obtained by the New Statesman, the comments were made to grassroots Conservatives in Tunbridge Wells in Kent 7 days ago. In response, Mr Sunak's team has defended the comments, saying he altered the formula to help both towns and rural areas.
Managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
The Unite Union has announced nearly 2,000 workers at the port of Felixstowe will strike for 8 days later this month in a dispute over pay. Union members will walk out from the 21st of August after they failed to reach a deal with the Felixstowe Dock and Railway Company. It's the busiest and biggest container port in Britain and is thought to handle nearly half of all container trade in the UK. Network Rail has voted to accept a pay offer after several strikes in disputes over paying conditions. The Transport Salaried Staffs Association says its managers have accepted the offer, which includes a 4% increase on base pay from the 1st of July and discounted travel for employees. But the union has said it will stay in talks with Network Rail to continue delivering a fair deal for its members going forwards. China's foreign ministry has announced the country is severing a number of diplomatic ties with the United States, including top-level military, following a visit by US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. Well, today, the nation has sent 49 jets across the Taiwan Strait median line in a show of strength. The country has also sanctioned Ms Pelosi and her immediate family, accusing her of interfering in China's internal affairs and threatening the peace and stability of Taiwan. Beijing has launched a number of missiles into waters near Taiwan in response to the visit, saying the US is playing with fire. US media reports the White House has summoned the Chinese ambassador to condemn the escalating actions. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the differences between the US and China need to be resolved peacefully. A hosepipe ban for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight comes into force today. Southern Waters says the country is experiencing one of the driest years on record. River flows are about 25% lower than they should be at this time of year. So it's asking customers to limit their water usage until further notice. The measure will follow next week for South East Water customers in Kent and Sussex. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's return to Deanna Davison.
Hello, you're with me, Deanna Davison, covering for Nana today on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, crime is something that affects us all, directly or indirectly, whether through fraud or cybercrime, robbery or theft, or incidents that are even more serious. The latest ONS crime statistics show a 14% increase in total crime versus pre-pandemic levels, and the highest levels ever recorded for sexual offences. Now, I got interested in criminal justice when I was 13. On a February night, my dad went to the pub with his friends and never came home. He'd been the victim of a one-punch assault. Hit once and he was dead before he hit the ground. He was just 35 years old. Across the years, I've done a lot of research and campaigning around one-punch assaults and have met dozens of families who've been affected by these crimes. The circumstances involved can be very varied, but there's one thing that unites them all. They all feel the criminal justice system is too lenient and the sentences are too low. Sentencing has been in the media a lot recently, with several high-profile appeals for changes in sentences. Wayne Couzens, the despicable murderer of Sarah Everard, recently appealed his whole life sentence, hoping for it to be reduced. Thankfully, his appeal was rejected, and rightfully, in my view, he will spend his entire life behind bars. The two killers of 6-year-old Arthur Lavinia Hughes also had their sentences reviewed. Emma Tustin's did not change, but the young boy's father, Thomas Hughes, had his term increased from 21 to 24 years, with the initial sentence deemed unduly lenient by the Court of Appeal. Triple murderer Jordan Monaghan, who killed 2 of his children and his new partner, had been handed a minimum 40-year life term, but saw this increase to 48 years by the Court of Appeal. These are for some of the most serious crimes, but for the victims of lesser crimes, the short sentences handed out can feel unjust and insulting. Claire Fulcher witnessed her partner Ian be struck by a single punch before he died 4 days later. As part of my all-party parliamentary group on one-punch assault, she spoke to us of her horror when the assailant, Jake McFarlane, was sentenced to just 2 years after admitting manslaughter. Add to that fact that many people in prison can be released at the halfway mark, serving just half their term behind bars, and it's no wonder that some victims feel let down. Thankfully, the unduly lenient sentence scheme exists for the most serious crimes, with victims or their families able to appeal sentences for review. Claire was able to successfully appeal, and the sentence for her partner's killer was almost doubled to 3 years and 8 months. But should the initial sentences themselves not reflect the severity of these crimes? And is less than 4 years really enough punishment for taking a life? So our question today is, are we, as a country, too soft on crime? Now, before we get stuck into that debate, here's what else is coming up today. At 5 o'clock, it's Friday Focus, and today we're taking a look at inflation. As the Bank of England hikes interest rates by 0.5%, they predict inflation will hit 13% in October. I'll be joined by world-leading economist Professor Shankar Singham to discuss what it really means for the pennies in your pocket. And for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have been battling out in head-to-head debates, vying to claim the top spot at number 10. The two candidates have taken different stances on a number of key policies, especially on how to grapple with the economy. And in Health Watch, the High Court has ruled that 12-year-old Archie Battersbee will die in hospital after his family lost their appeal to move him to a hospice. Doctors have said the youngster is brain stem dead and therefore can't live without a ventilator. But how do doctors come to that difficult decision in declaring someone brain dead? Neurologist Dr. Mike Barnes will join me. That's coming up in the next hour. Tell me what you think on everything we've discussed by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Right, well, let's get started. Welcome again to my panel, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and broadcaster Danny Kelly. So first, I want to talk about the story that I was just mentioning there around crime. Christine, what's your stance? Are we too soft on crime in this country?
First of all, I had no idea about your personal backstory. I'm horrified. That must have been unbelievable. I can't imagine.
Well, it's a long time ago.
It
The
is.
silver lining is it spurred me on to get to the job I'm doing now as a Member of Parliament. So,
OK, well, good for you. It shows you the sort of stuff you're made of. Well, the most important thing, in my view, in deterring crime is two things. First of all, is the fear of getting caught. But if you think you're going to get away with it, you're going to do it. Which is why, for example, during lockdown, there was a huge decrease in the number of burglaries because everybody was at home and everybody thought, well, I can't burgle somebody's house because they're going to be there. So that's the biggest. And then it is sentences. And if the police go on handing out these lenient sentences, but when you have the Met, I mean, it's not just the Met, we've got, is it 4 of our police forces or 5 in special measures? I mean, there's something seriously wrong. And the Met seems to be in complete chaos. I mean, you mentioned the Sarah Everard case.
Yes.
And Operation Midland was a complete and utter disaster. And the millions and millions of pounds that the police have wasted pursuing the wrong targets. And you see police going on, they go on the gay parades and things like that, and they're just not interested. And what is the prime function of the police? It's not to do that sort of thing. It is to solve crime, get criminals and then serve them up so that they get decent sentences.
So, Danny, I see you laughing there. Go on.
No,
Yeah.
it's negative publicity, isn't it, to dress in...
I think so. It's not what the police are there for.
Okay, well, I mean, the argument could be that they're part of the community, but I'm with you, I agree with you. I'm just throwing maybe a different perspective. Are we too soft on crime? Well, it's not the copper's fault. All the police can do is nick the baddies and put them in front, with the help of the CPS, and put them in front of a judge. So we then think, I think the valid question is the judiciary too soft on crime? And this is where the politicians can actually affect the judiciary. So it's almost an introspective look into the way that we police the streets and put people in front of the judge, but also why the judges seem to be handing out lenient sentences. And I think that's the question. So to have so many criminals face an appeal and get a stiffer sentence, that suggests to me that maybe there's something incorrect with the judge on the day, or the QC, the prosecuting QC didn't put forward all of the evidence or something, because the system is broken if somebody is getting too lenient a sentence. And just like Christine, I was unaware about your father. What, if you don't mind me asking, what sentence did that thug get who punched you?
Nothing. It's one of the things that's been the hardest to cope with. He claimed self-defence and there was contradictory evidence. Ergo, there was, for us and for the family, it felt like there was no justice. I mean, the jury did their job, the judges did their job, the solicitors did their job, but it was really, really difficult indeed.
I bet it was. And what, if I may ask, just to pursue that, what sentence would you think would be fair and correct? Because, again, just to play devil's advocate...
Had there been no provocation, I mean, let's assume there was no provocation.
I suppose the defence QC would say he never intended to kill him. He just wanted to smack him on the nose.
And that's what's so difficult about these one-punch assaults in particular.
Very much so.
Because there's very, very rarely kind of, someone has planned to do this. They haven't planned to kill. They might have planned to cause harm, of course.
That's correct.
But they're kind of freak incidents. We know this, but it doesn't make it any easier for the families and for victims who survive but are left with, life-changing injuries as well.
Do you think that the families, the victims of the families, that should be an influence on the sentence?
I definitely do, especially when it's something where it's kind of violence or it's something that leaves a lasting scar. If your car gets nicked, your car gets nicked. It's still awful and it should never happen. But it's not the same as losing a loved one or being left with life-changing injuries or being left with severe mental issues after a sexual assault or something along those lines.
Yeah.
I think there does need to be a lot more thought given to victims and the families of victims.
But in most cases, I think I'm right, that there is an impact assessment allowed, and victims, whatever it is, whether it's sexual assault or one punch, which I had not heard that phrase before, victims are allowed to speak out in court and say what the impact has been, because, I mean, that's vitally important.
There are victim statements. Sometimes they're read out on behalf of the families. Sometimes they're read out by the families themselves, which does have an influence. I think one of the things that I find very interesting is kind of what category actually gets referred up to the CPS. Because I know sometimes crimes are kind of referred on a lesser category with a hope of securing a conviction.
Yeah.
Thinking if we do it on this particular grade, we might not get a conviction at all, but if we do it on this grade, sure, the maximum sentence will be lower, but we've got a better chance of actually nicking them.
Well, the CPS very often is in an impossible situation, and possibly your father's situation was one when, on the one hand, you have this set of evidence, and on the other, and it's one person's where, like a lot of these sexual assault and rape accusations, it's very, very difficult. It's one person's word against another, and the CPS, unless they have a reasonable cause to believe that they are going to get a prosecution, then it is a waste of public money to pursue it. So it's not as easy as it looks.
Absolutely, and I think I certainly get a lot coming through my inbox as a member of Parliament saying we need to be a lot tougher, bang people up for longer and all this. It's not quite that simple, not least because of prison places as well, and the cost of keeping people in prison.
So, Diane, how would Parliament adjust and affect the prison sentencing then, do you think?
Well, for individual offences, of course, we can change minimum sentencing kind of within the law itself. So let's say, for example, we wanted to change a life term from 18 years to 25 years. We could do that in Parliament if we wanted to. But a lot of it comes down to actual Sentencing Council guidance, which is then there for the judges to refer to and draw upon when they're actually giving out those sentences. So we can have an impact, and we've done it on various things. We've done it for pet theft very recently to increase punishments for pet theft, including prison sentences, various other things. I mean, we've done loads since I got in, and that's less than 3 years.
Boris Johnson, a couple of months ago, before he was ousted,
defenestrated,
coup d'etat, the Rwanda plan, he said that he faces a battle with, quote, lefty lawyers. Do you think that there is a lefty influence amongst the judiciary?
It's hard to say, isn't it? I mean, I certainly think when it comes to immigration issues, there is that perception amongst some kind of on kind of my wing of politics that certainly is the case, because you get these last-minute legal challenges that, frankly, let's not beat around the bush, cost the taxpayer hundreds of thousands of pounds. Often with very minimal grounds, but it is tied into the European Court of Human Rights there as well, which makes it even trickier at the moment.
So if you had an overly lenient sentence, then don't we need to start looking directly at that individual judge and to sort of ask questions as to why it was overly lenient? Because had it not been referred to the council, I can't remember the name of the council.
Court of Appeals.
OK, had it not been referred to the Court of Appeals, no doubt by the family of the victim or the defence QC or whatever, then that could actually continue to happen over and over again. And I'm just wondering how many have slipped through the net without going to the Court of Appeals.
You've got to believe that the judiciary are independent and that they set aside personal political feelings when they go into the court. Now, I have my own views on certain members of the judiciary that they don't necessarily do that, but as a system, you have got to believe that, and you cannot start interfering with the independence of the judiciary.
Well, politicians interfere with the judiciary, not the independence, but the Court of Appeal are actually saying that you've got it wrong. So there is direct interference to say, well, look, he's guilty, but you got it wrong with the sentencing.
Well, we've got fired up on this starting debate. That's all we've got time for right now. But I'm sure at home you will be sending us your thoughts and your views. Do keep them coming in. You're with Deanna Davison on GB News, on your TV and on digital radio. After the break, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have been battling out in head-to-head debates, vying to claim the top spot at number 10. The two candidates have taken different stances on a number of key policies, especially on how to grapple with the economy. Well, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? Send us an email on gbviews@gbnews.uk and tell us what you think. And you can tweet us at GBNews. There is a poll up there right now asking, who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? Cast your vote now. But first, it's on to the weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. If you're after rainfall, well, most places are not going to see any this weekend. Plenty of sunshine around, a chilly start, but things are turning warmer, more so as we go into next week. The dry weather, courtesy of this area of high pressure, but it isn't going to be dry everywhere. We do have this weather front approaching the northwest. That will bring some patchy rain across parts of Scotland tomorrow. Some rain in the form of showers this evening over eastern Scotland and northeast England. They're fading fairly rapidly. For most, it's a fine Friday evening with sunny spells leading into a dry and a clear night. But there's that weather front just bringing some rain across the Highlands and the Western Isles by dawn. That'll help to lift the temperatures here, but elsewhere, quite a chilly night actually, a fresh, comfortable night down into single figures in many places to start the weekend. So we start with blue skies and the sunshine will soon start to lift those temperatures, but it will be quite a grey morning for Scotland. Bit of patchy rain for Northern Ireland, and we'll see a few lightish showers spreading across the central belt at times, but staying fairly damp across the far north of Scotland. Temperatures here mid to high teens. If it brightens up in the east later, we might see 20 Celsius, but further south, easily over 20 degrees, 24, 25 across the southeast. So feeling pretty warm by the afternoon after that chilly old start. A bit more cloud splitting into northern England, small chance of a shower here and there on Saturday evening. We will keep further outbreaks of rain going over the Highlands, the Northern Isles and the Western Isles, but otherwise most places looking again dry as we head into Sunday. And again, certainly across the south, another day of lengthy spells of sunshine, and after a coolish start it'll be pretty warm by the afternoon. Always likely to keep some outbreaks of rain going across western Scotland, but a largely dry and bright day across Aberdeenshire down through to the borders, and here turning a bit warmer. Further south again, temperatures likely to get into the mid or even high 20s, and temperatures set to rise further next week.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
You're with Nana Davison on GB News on TV and on digital radio. Now, before the break, we were discussing if the UK is too soft on crime. Well, let's have a look at what you have been saying. Sean says, without a doubt, yes. Our legal system is too lenient to the point where criminals are laughing at our police and courts. There's no deterrent. More major crimes should carry natural life sentence without appeal. Martin says you can't blame the police on light sentences. Firstly, the CPS blocks so many prosecutions, then the courts award ridiculously light sentences. John says, why do we let these people live when there is no doubt these people are guilty of these heinous acts of violence to save the public from these child murderers? Bring back the death penalty. Keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now it's time for the Great British Debate, and I'm asking, who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have been battling out in head-to-head debates, vying to claim the top spot at number 10. The two candidates have taken different stances on a number of key policies, especially on how to grapple with the economy. Truss has been a favourite amongst the grassroots Tories and has taken a lead in the polls, with a number of senior Tory members also stepping out to back her. While Truss has been a clear favourite in the polls, it seems Sunak has begun to win over those who've remained undecided over the last few weeks. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? Well, I'm joined by the former Home Office Minister, Norman Baker. Thank you for your time with us this morning. First question, who do you think has what it takes to be our next Prime Minister?
Well, as you know, I'm completely neutral on this matter, not being a Conservative Party member, and I'm one of the 99.7% of the people who won't have a vote in this matter. So I can give you an objective view because I don't have a drum to bang. What I would say is I saw the debate last night on Sky, and I thought that Rishi Sunak actually came across pretty well and looked like Prime Minister material, whereas Liz Truss, who, of course, as you say, is a front-runner, looked rather wooden, wasn't very good at answering questions, and was rather flat-footed. And I think the audience felt that way as well, because at the end, the vote was clearly for Rishi Sunak rather than Liz Truss.
Why do you think it's played out differently in that studio audience versus what we're seeing in some of the more national polling, like the recent one from YouGov?
Well, I think last night people had an opportunity to hear the candidates. They were well interviewed by Keir Burley, as a matter of fact. And I think Kay got under their skin in the sense that she actually made them reveal what they really thought about matters and pushed them on particular policies, and that was quite revealing. Whereas I think the national position is, to some extent, driven by opinion polls, driven by the Daily Mail and Daily Express, for example, who've been solid for Liz Truss from day one. So people only relying on those papers, for example, would have got a skewed opinion on how matters are. And obviously, as you mentioned at the beginning, we've now got cabinet ministers coming out in favour of Liz Truss. I mean, to be honest with you, without being too cynical, I think that's people who've decided what they think the result will be and are trying to bag a position in the cabinet when the election's all over.
So I'm curious, Norman. At the minute, we've got polls looking as though they're favouring Liz, as you've just said there. Yeah. But if last night is to be believed, it looks as though Rishi is building momentum. Now, there are 4-ish weeks to go until that result is going to come in. Ballot papers are landing as we speak. Do you think it's possible now for Rishi to turn it around?
Well, you know, I think it would have been possible. I'm not sure it is now. And what's the difference? The difference is that we've now got to change to the rules because of the concerns by GCHQ about infiltration by unfriendly countries, no doubt Russia and China, about potential interference with the election process. That the Conservative members, who I understood at the beginning, had the option to recast their vote and change their vote if they wanted to near the time. That option has now been taken away. So we have the position now, as I understand it, where once people vote, that's it. And if people get kind of buyer's remorse in 2 weeks' time, it'll be too late.
Now, I want to go back to this kind of economic policy, because there's a clear difference, isn't there, between those two candidates? Yes. Now, you were part of the coalition government at a time when the focus really was on the economy, on paying down the deficit. So based on kind of your experience there and your current thoughts, who do you think does have the right idea on economic policy?
Well, as you say, it was a time when we inherited a bit of a mess from the Labour government in 2010, and the need to get the public finances in order was key to what the coalition did. And I think the coalition actually did it rather well over the 5-year period and was a very stable government. And part of that was indeed the economic approach that was adopted across the two parties. So given that, and looking where we are now, I think the situation for the economy is even worse than it was in 2010, partly because of COVID, of course, partly because of the Ukraine war, and dare I say to GBNews viewers, partly, I think, because of Brexit. But all those things together have made it a very, very challenging situation for the incoming Prime Minister and Chancellor. And of course, nothing's happening at the moment because the government's on autopilot until the results becomes clear. I think my instinct is to say that Rishi Sunak's approach to be careful is probably the right one. And people who are going to vote, Tory party members, I would advise them to not go for unwise jam today, but rather wiser jam in the future.
And final one, obviously, we're asking who our viewers trust to be the next Prime Minister. And trust in politics at the moment doesn't feel like it's in a good place. Based on your experience in office, do you think it's getting worse? And how can these candidates revive it?
Oh, it's getting a lot worse, I'm afraid. I'm partly responsible for it getting worse because I'm the MP, if you remember, who helped expose the abuse of MPs' expenses back in about 2008, 2009. And that was necessary to do that and to correct that. And it has been corrected, as you all know. But it's left some lasting damage about the ability of people to believe what politicians do. And the fact that Boris Johnson, for example, sought to prorogue Parliament illegally and mislead the Queen hasn't helped that process of believing what politicians say. So whoever inherits this position as Prime Minister will have a huge challenge to deal with that. And my advice for them will be to get a cabinet of all the talents, if you were, across the Conservative Party, rather than one faction, to involve Parliament more, rather than trying to run this as a government which doesn't consult Parliament enough, and to be open and honest with what they're doing and to rebuild the trust that way with the public, and to admit when mistakes are made as well.
Well, Norman, thank you very much for your time today. Norman Baker there, former Home Office Minister, giving his insights on the Conservative leadership contest. And now let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Sylvia says, trust is a very strong word. Who has made the best case? I have to say, Liz Truss. Sean says, I say bring back Boris. At least he made us laugh throughout his premiership. And Bob says, it is a very difficult choice. I think Rishi Sunak is the most capable out of the two candidates. He has a better economic policy and is far more charismatic. Well, keep your views coming in. You're with Deanna Davison, covering for Nana today on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, we'll continue the Great British Debate. And I'm asking, who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and broadcaster Danny Kelly. And coming up at 5 o'clock, it's Friday Focus. And today we're taking a look at inflation. As the Bank of England hikes interest rates by 0.5%, they predict inflation will hit 13% in October. I'll be joined by world-leading economist Professor Shankar Singham to discuss what it means for the pennies in your pocket. But first, it's the latest news headlines with Tatiana.
It's 4:32. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Archie Battersbee's family have lodged an appeal after losing a High Court bid to have him transferred to a hospice. The 12-year-old, who's on life support, has been in a coma since April. This morning, a judge ruled it was not in Archie's best interest to relocate him from the Royal London Hospital. The two candidates hoping to be the next Tory party leader have clashed over state of the economy. That's after the Bank of England warned the UK is facing its longest recession since the financial crisis in 2008. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak claims his rival's economic plan would damage the country, but Liz Truss argues her measures will tackle rising prices. The Unite Union has announced nearly 2,000 workers at the port of Felixstowe will strike for 8 days in a dispute over pay. Members will walk out from the 21st of August after they failed to reach a deal with the Felixstowe Dock and Railway Company. It's the busiest and biggest container port in Britain and is thought to handle nearly half of all container trade in the UK. China's foreign ministry has announced the country is severing a number of diplomatic ties with the United States following the US House of Representatives Speaker's trip to Taiwan. The country has also sanctioned Nancy Pelosi and her immediate family, accusing her of interfering in China's internal affairs and threatening the peace and stability of Taiwan. Beijing has launched a number of missiles into waters near Taiwan in response to the visit, saying the US is playing with fire. US media reports the White House has summoned the Chinese ambassador to condemn the escalating actions. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.206 and €1.186 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,473.36 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. You're with Deanna Davison covering for Nana here on GB News and on digital radio. And it's time for the Great British Debate. And I'm asking, who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have been battling out in head-to-head debates, vying to claim the top spot at number 10. The two candidates have taken different stances on a number of key policies, especially on how to grapple with the economy. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? Well, let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and broadcaster Danny Kelly. Danny, I'm going to come to you first this time. What are your thoughts on this leadership contest?
Well, I thought there was a goal line clearance last night and Rishi Sunak pulled a rabbit out of a top hat. He really did, because he was failing, I believe, in the previous appearances with the hustings. I thought that 2 or 3 hustings ago, he was really, really rude. He kept on interrupting Liz Truss, and I thought that people aren't going to like that. Last night, just as Norman said, I think he appeared quite prime ministerial, and you could imagine him at the G7. You could imagine him shaking hands with whoever is the incumbent at the White House. Joe Biden, obviously. No, you know, I was just thinking, I just had in my mind Trump was coming back. But of course,
he probably wants to come back.
He's going to be Prime Minister in 4 or 5 weeks' time. So yeah. And I thought that, OK, I'm in business away from broadcasting. I'm a car dealer. And I know the practicalities of running businesses. And I think Liz Truss, who I know you're a fan of, Deanna, I think Liz Truss, I'm warming towards Rishi because he said, listen, this isn't going to be easy. I'm not going to butter anything up for you. You know, what Liz is proposing is the wrong way of trying to get the economy back on its feet. And do you know what else I take notice of? I take notice of the MPs who are backing either Liz or Rishi. If I like those MPs and I listen to what they say and I analyse why they're supporting either Liz or Rishi Sunak, and I think, do you know what? I like you. I think you've got integrity. I think I'm going to follow what you say.
So I'm going to have to butter you up then, aren't I, to get you back in league, basically, is what you're telling me here. Christine, what about you?
I think, just to pick up your very last point, I think there's probably a bit of opportunism slipping in. Far be it from me to suggest that MPs should be opportunists.
Oh,
you know, they see that Liz
Liz
Truss is winning, so I want a job in her team. I was interested too in what Norman Baker said, because I watched that debate, and having watched Rishi in the earlier on when he was being incredibly rude and bullying and mansplaining, which of course for a woman is the worst thing in the world, I warmed to him last night, and I thought, yes, you are looking Prime Minister. Well, personally, I don't give a damn how much his shoes cost. And I don't give a damn how much Liz Truss's earrings cost. So I think, honestly, Nadine Dorries should keep those rather stupid observations to herself. And I thought they both got a sort of tough call from Kay Burley, who's not my favourite person. One or two of her comments were a bit puerile. But personally, I wanted Kemi Badenoch, so I'm deeply disappointed. I mean, I haven't voted Tory since 1997, so I don't really see why I should have any comment. But I wanted Kemi. I think she would have been hell on a stick for Labour, and I think it would have been a really fresh, new start. And I think she had all the right instincts. Yes, not very experienced, but she can have the right people around her. But anyway, we are where we are. And we haven't heard a great deal from either of them about anything except the economy. But, of course, it is the economy, stupid, isn't it? That is the bedrock. And that swings me towards Liz Truss, because I'm not an economist, like 99.9% of the population. And if you get 100 economists in the room, you're going to get 100 different opinions.
101 sometimes, it feels
opinions, yes. But there is one economist who I do trust, and that's Patrick Minford, who was an advisor to Margaret Thatcher, and he was very instrumental through his advice in getting the country out of its appalling mess as the sick man of Europe in the 70s and the early 80s, and advising Margaret Thatcher on the best course to take. And he is firmly behind Liz Truss's stance on the economy. So that swings me very much towards her. But, you know, I can't see her on the national stage. She was so wooden last night, so deeply uncharismatic. And when Kay Burley listed all her flip-flops and said, and it was pretty cutting, you know, will the real Liz Truss please stand up? I thought, well, yeah, what is the real Liz Truss? Because she has flopped on so many things. But we'll see. I mean, I agree, Rishi Sunak is gaining momentum until the exposure of his extraordinary remarks at Tunbridge Wells.
Yeah, let's
I'll
talk
give you
about
all the
that,
money.
because obviously I'm on Team Liz. I'm not here for a pitch today, I should say, but to give Rishi some credit, I feel like what he meant to say was, I've been helping change the Treasury formulas so that it helps support rural areas as well as urban areas. But the way in which it came across was absolutely terrible.
I think what he was saying was that you can't just dump all the money in the big urban areas.
Absolutely.
And there are rural areas in what are regarded as the affluent parts of the country that are deeply deserving of support. But it didn't come out like that.
I think you're right. For someone who is such a great orator and is so articulate naturally, I think the way he used the word shove, so Labour got in power, I thought that was so pejorative. Why say shove? It's almost like you're dismissing a huge amount of money that's been allocated to poverty-stricken areas in order to bring people back up on their feet. To use the word shove, what he should have said was Labour came in and naturally they prioritised areas of deprivation, and we understand that. But what I'd like to do as a Conservative, that's how he should have delivered it. Now, whether that will affect the 160,000 Conservative Tory members who are going to vote, I don't think it will. Maybe it will a few. I don't think it's going to affect the outcome. But for someone so articulate, I was really surprised about that.
Because it's always difficult when you're talking to a small group of people. I mean, maybe if there were 100 present in that garden in Tunbridge Wells, I'd be surprised, maybe only 50. You're talking to a small group you want to hear because they've all got to vote. You want them to hear what they want to hear, and then you forget about the wider world, and, of course, you never in a million years thought it would come out. But it was badly phrased.
Awful.
Absolutely
awful. And this day and age, everyone's got one of these things. Everyone's got a smartphone. Everyone's recording.
But Deanna, whether it affects the outcome, and I don't think it will, what it will do is affect him at Parliament. When he's there at the dispatch box trying to persuade Labour about certain policies, then that will always come back to haunt him, using that pejorative way of expressing something that he could have made his point so eloquently and reasonably. but unfortunately, it's there on public record now. That's going to come back and haunt him, I think.
Absolutely.
This is the awful thing. All this blue-on-blue stuff, a lot of commentators are saying it doesn't really matter, but, I mean, the insults and stuff that's been thrown around by all the leadership candidates, now just the two of them, is just providing the most amazing ammunition to Labour. But
we've written their leaflet for them, effectively, haven't we?
Of course. May I ask, Diana, you're a fan of Liz Truss, and what's persuading you to back Liz Truss?
Well, as I said, I don't want to get into it too much
No,
because
I
obviously I'm here in a more neutral fashion today.
I understand.
For me, a lot of it's about the economic stuff. I back Liz's plan. I think we need to be bold. We need to be ambitious. I never want to see us raising taxes, so we need to be cutting taxes now, getting money into people's pockets because people are struggling. But for me, one of the things that I really love about Liz, one, she's got experience in spades. I have no hesitation that she can step into Downing Street on day one and get on with the job. She doesn't need training wheels. She can be in there chairing a NATO meeting. She can chair a meeting of Cobra. She can speak to world leaders on day one and crack on with the job. And I think given the situation the country's in, with the cost of living issues, given the situation we're in with this war in Ukraine, we need someone who can do that. But for me, she's such an ideas person. You know, she's willing to actually explore new ways of thinking, challenge orthodoxies and try something new. Economically, the orthodoxy clearly hasn't been working for Britain. We've had stagnant growth for such a long time. We've got massive issues with our productivity. So I want to see someone who's going to really try and shake that up to get Britain moving, because we're a great country. We always have been. But I think we've fallen a bit by the wayside recently, and we need to get back on track.
And again, sorry to interrogate
That's all right.
this is your show.
It is what I am here for, Danny.
And Christine used the word catty, I think, between the exchange between Kay Burley, and she said, will the real Liz Truss stand up? So who is the real Liz Truss?
Well, I think you mentioned earlier flip-flopping. If there's one thing that Liz has always been very consistent on, it's been on believing in freedom, believing in democracy, hence why she got behind Brexit, even though that's not the way that she voted, but also knowing that Britain has got so much potential, but we need to unlock those opportunities and be bold on the economy. She's been consistent on that right since she was at university, even if she wasn't a Conservative at the time. That's the real Liz Truss. And she's fun, she's good-humoured.
Is she?
Yeah, she's a great person to hang out with.
We've had a fun and good-humoured Prime Minister for a long time. I thought we were looking for a change.
But I think it's a side of Liz you don't often see on sort of telly when she's doing the debates and stuff.
And is she going to be able to... This is one of my reasons for wanting Kemi Badenoch, because I think she would have been able to make mincemeat of Keir Starmer.
You need to forget Kemi.
I do, I know. I can't forget.
Oh, I know she's
cannot forget.
Woman.
And I hope the country won't forget it.
No,
I hope she'll be out there with a big job memo to Liz if she gets a job, please.
Whoever wins, I would assume Kemi's going to be in that cabinet.
I just think that the thought of Keir Starmer having to cope with Kemi Badenoch across the dispatch boxes just would have been joyful.
It would be fiery. But anyway, this show's not just about our views, it's about you and your views too. So let's welcome one of our great British voices. This is your opportunity to be on the show and tell us what you really think about the topics that we're discussing. Well, for this hour, let's head on over to speak with Julie from Bedfordshire. Julie, thank you for joining us today. What are your thoughts? Who do you trust to be the next Prime Minister?
Hi, Diana. Thank you for having me on. I have to be honest, right at this moment, I don't trust either of them. I'm seeing too much lip service, and really, for me, everything that Rishi said yesterday at Tunbridge Wells really has turned me off him. I think he's a great performer, and I think he's great when he's scripted, but I think left to his own devices, he makes these tiny little mistakes like he made yesterday. And for us, the general public, who unfortunately aren't making these decisions on who's going to be our new leader at the moment, and it's left to his friends and his peers, who obviously, like Christina's already touched on, want a job in that parliament as well. I think he may have really pulled the rug out from under himself there, sort of a reverse Robin Hood, robbing from the poor and giving to the rich, or giving to the Rishi in this particular instance. Liz Truss, for me, I just find her a little bit too rigid, I'm afraid. I think she's trying to maybe model herself on Margaret Thatcher, and you shouldn't try and be somebody else. You should try and be yourself. She should try and be the first Liz Truss, not try and be the next Margaret Thatcher. And I think really, for me, if I had to put my money on somebody, then it would be Liz Truss, for the very simple fact that I think she would perform better from day one as Prime Minister. She would just get in there and get the job done. Whereas I would worry Rishi would need too many spin doctors behind him, writing his scripts for him before he's actually able to sit in a room and do anything off the cuff. I worry Rishi wouldn't be able to do that for me.
Well, Julie, thank you very much for your insights today. Julie there, sort of hesitantly and a little bit reluctantly backing Liz, I think, just if you had to make a decision. Well, Julie, thank you so much.
Ask you something on the back of that.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I just wanted to ask, as you are there in the House of Commons, let's assume Liz Truss gets it. The majority of MPs backed Rishi. How is she going to cope with that?
Well, it's an interesting one.
She's not going to have the backing necessarily of the parliamentary party.
Well, you might think that. I mean, I don't know how the numbers fall. There's still a lot of MPs who haven't declared, but it's amazing seeing how many have now got behind Liz following that vote.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the numbers. I haven't been keeping up with them. But I'd say it's probably about even, especially when you bear in mind a lot of the former leadership contenders are behind her as well. You know, Tom Tugendhat, Penny Mordaunt, Nadine Zahawi, many more. I imagine the MP numbers are very similar. But the thing is, you know, ultimately, what is the Conservative Party here for? We're here to win elections so that we can make the country better. Ultimately, that's what it's about. And I think we all know that a united party is the only party that can win. So I'm hoping, maybe it's a little bit naively, but I'm hoping that the party will unite come September so that we can focus on actually getting stuff done.
Well, you just want the waters to close over the whole thing. As you say, get on with the job, whoever's in charge. Absolutely.
Well, as you know, today I'm asking who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? And lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Chris says there should be an option for neither of them. The only way forward is a general election. On that one, I always say be careful what you wish for. Well, James says, I would say Rishi Sunak has blown it after that video of him was leaked showing his true intentions. Conservative members will not be amused. And Susie says, I wouldn't choose either of them. The lockdown policy has ruined the economy. There have been major problems with illegal immigration, not to mention the green agenda adding a lot more onto our bills. The nation are fed up. And John says, if Truss doesn't win, the country is destined to be doomed. Simon says, Boris Johnson should remain as Prime Minister. I would never vote for Rishi Sunak as he's behaved like a snake. And Liz Truss is a weaker version of Theresa May. Sadly, the position seems to be a poisoned chalice. Well, there's also a poll up on Twitter today throughout the show asking who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? Currently, 88% say Liz Truss and 12% say Rishi Sunak. Well, keep those votes and your views coming in. You're with Deanna Davison covering for Nana today here on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up after the break, the High Court has ruled that 12-year-old Archie Battersbee will die in hospital after his family lost their appeal to move him to a hospice. Doctors have said the youngster is brain stem dead and therefore can't live without a ventilator. But how do doctors come to that difficult decision in declaring someone brain dead? Neurologist Dr. Mike Barnes will join me. But first, here's a short break.
The man who wants to be the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, sits down with me, Esther McVeigh and Philip Davis this Saturday. Don't miss it. Does the former Chancellor have what it takes to beat his rival, Liz Truss? Can he regain the momentum he's lost over the last couple of weeks? All questions and all answers put to the Tory leadership hopeful, Rishi Sunak, tomorrow, 10 a.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GBNews, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
You're with Deanna Davison covering for Nana today on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. The High Court has ruled that 12-year-old Archie Battersbee will die in hospital after his family lost their appeal to move him to a hospice. His mother, Holly Dance, tragically found her son unconscious in his bedroom and was subsequently placed on life support. Doctors have said the youngster is brainstem dead and therefore can't live without a ventilator. Archie's family have battled it out in the courts to keep the young boy on life support, but to no avail. So how do doctors come to that difficult decision about when to stop treatment in cases like this? Well, to find out more about this process, I'm now joined by former neurologist Dr. Mike Barnes. Mike, thank you for joining us today. As a starter, just explain to us what it means to be brainstem dead.
Yes, so the brainstem is the lower part of the brain just above the spine that's responsible for keeping us alive, really. It's the part of the brain that controls our breathing, controls our blood pressure, controls our consciousness. And what the doctors have to do is to make sure that that part of the brain is not functioning. And there are a number of tests that can confirm that.
So can you just explain to us how the clinical process works for someone to be declared brainstem dead?
Yeah. Sure. Well, they need usually two doctors to perform those tests, and they should be independent of the hospital or the family, although obviously the hospital and the family have a right to say and offer an opinion. But two independent doctors should undertake those tests at a time apart as well. You do it once and you do it again some days, usually later. And what they have to do is to test so-called reflexes of the brainstem. And there are a number of things. For example, they look at the pupils of the eye and they shine a light in the eye. And if you shine a light into the eye, usually the pupil constricts. And in someone who's brainstem dead, it doesn't constrict. They have fixed, dilated pupils. You can do something called the corneal reflex. You can put a little bit of cotton wool on the eye, and normally people will blink. That reflex is not there either. You can do what sounds an odd test of putting cold water in the ear. And that will induce eye movements in people with brainstem reflexes, and it doesn't in people who are brainstem dead. You check whether there's any motor response. In other words, sometimes that's a painful stimulus to see what the person does. See if there's no cough reflex or gag reflex, something we're familiar with after all those COVID tests. You gag when you put something at the back of the throat. Probably the main test is where you actually take someone off the ventilator for a few minutes, and the carbon dioxide in the blood will build up, which is a big stimulus to breathing, and you see if someone will breathe under those circumstances. And I presume the doctors at the hospital have gone through those tests and confirmed, therefore, that sadly Archie is brainstem dead.
Can there be disagreements between doctors over whether those functions are operating as they should?
No, really, because they're fairly definitive tests. You can see whether someone's blinking, you can see whether they've got a cough reflex. It's not something, you can see whether they're breathing when you take them off the ventilator or not. It's a fairly black and white response. Sometimes the situation is confused by what are called spinal reflexes, and these are reflexes below the brain. Sometimes people who are brainstem dead can still twitch a finger or move a foot, sometimes spontaneously, sometimes a stimulus. And of course, totally understandably, some families will misinterpret that, and they'll touch a hand and the hand appears to grasp. That doesn't mean the person is not brainstem dead. It means that the reflex to make that happen goes through the spine and not through the brain. So sometimes there are confusing factors, but generally this is a diagnosis that is relatively straightforward if the two doctors are trained, know what they're doing, and come to that conclusion.
And if they do come to that very sad conclusion, how do doctors break the news to the family members?
Well, it's such a sad and difficult process. It's simply a matter of sitting down and patiently telling the family, going through what I've said, maybe going through it several times, because obviously in those distressing circumstances, people aren't taking things in. And explain, for example, that the gripping of the hand or twitching of the foot does not necessarily mean the person is not brainstem dead. So it's a matter of honest, straightforward appraisal given to the family in simple terms. I don't mean that rudely, but not in complicated terms that the family's not going to understand, but in simple, straightforward terms. And in most of the time, the family will understand what's happening, and most of the time, with reluctance, clearly and sadly agree with it, but not always.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Barnes, thank you for your insights there. Dr. Mike Barnes, former neurologist, joining us there to discuss the tragic Archie Battersbee case and what it means to be brainstem dead. Well, you're with me, Deanna Davison, covering for Nana today here on GB News. More to come in the next hour. You're with me, Deanna Davison, covering for Nana today here on GB News, on TV and on digital radio. For the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. But first, let's get the latest news headlines with Tatiana.
Good afternoon, it's 5 o'clock. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Archie Battersbee's family have lodged an appeal after losing a High Court bid to have him transferred to a hospice. The 12-year-old, who's on life support, has been in a coma since April. This morning, a judge ruled it was not in Archie's best interest to relocate him from the Royal London Hospital. His parents have pledged to fight to the end so he can spend his final moments with dignity. The two candidates vying for Tory party leader have clashed over the UK's impending recession. The Bank of England has warned the country will face its longest recession since the financial crisis as it increased the interest rate by half a percentage point to 1.75%. The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak claims his rival's economic plans would damage the country. But Liz Truss believes measures can be taken to avoid a recession.
The reality is we are facing a recession if we carry on with our business as usual policies. We need to do more, and that's why I'm determined to reform the economy and keep taxes low. If there is a recession, that will mean people losing jobs, that will mean more economic hardship. So that is why it's so important that we do all we can to grow the economy.
Rishi Sunak says he wants to be honest with the country about the challenges ahead.
I'm not sitting here or standing here promising you tens and tens of billions of pounds of goodies straight away, because I don't think that's the right thing to do for our economy. I think it's risky. I think it risks making the inflation problem far worse and costing you all far more. I want to be straight with the country about the challenges we face and what is going to be required to fix them. And that's why I think you can trust me on this, because I'm prepared to do that, even though it's going to cost me politically.
Meanwhile, it's emerged Mr Sunak told a campaign event that as Chancellor, he diverted government funding from deprived urban areas towards more affluent towns. Video obtained by the New Statesman shows the leadership hopeful speaking to grassroots Conservatives in Tunbridge Wells and Kent last week. Mr Sunak's team has defended the comments, saying he altered the formula to help both towns and rural areas.
Managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
The Unite Union has announced nearly 2,000 workers at the port of Felixstowe will strike for 8 days later this month in a dispute over pay. Union members will walk out from the 21st of August after they failed to reach a deal with the Felixstowe Dock and Railway Company. It's the biggest and busiest container port in Britain and is thought to handle nearly half of all container trade in the UK. Network Rail has voted to accept a pay offer after several strikes in disputes over pay and conditions. The Transport Salaried Staffs Association says its managers have accepted the offer, which includes a 4% increase on base pay from the 1st of July and discounted travel for employees. But the union has said it will stay in talks with Network Rail to continue delivering a fair deal for its members going forwards. China's foreign ministry has announced the country is severing a number of diplomatic ties with the United States, including top-level military, following a visit by US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. Today, the nation has sent 49 jets across the Taiwan Straits median line in a show of strength. The country has also sanctioned Ms. Pelosi and her immediate family, accusing her of interfering in China's internal affairs and threatening the peace and stability of Taiwan. Beijing has launched a number of missiles into waters near Taiwan in response to the visit, saying the US is playing with fire. US media reports the White House has summoned the Chinese ambassador to condemn the escalating actions. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the differences between the US and China need to be resolved peacefully. A hosepipe ban for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight comes into force today. Southern Water says the country is experiencing one of the driest years on record. River flows are about 25% lower than they should be at this time of year, so it's asking customers to limit their water usage until further notice. The measures will follow next week for South East Water customers in Kent and Sussex. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Deanna Davison.
This is GB News and I'm Deanna Davison covering for Nana today. For the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion, mine, theirs and yours. We'll be debating, discussing and at times disagreeing. Joining me today, it's author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and broadcaster Danny Kelly. Still to come. In just a moment, it's Friday Focus, and today we're taking a look at inflation. As the Bank of England hikes interest rates by 0.5%, they predict inflation will hit 13% in October. I'll be joined by world-leading economist Professor Shankar Singham to discuss what it really means for the pennies in your pockets. Great British debate this hour. I'm asking, can the West afford to be tough on China? China has amped up its military intimidation of Taiwan yesterday by firing ballistic missiles which flew over the island and landed in Japanese waters. But can the UK risk getting involved in the escalating tensions between China and Taiwan and potentially lose the opportunity to spend over £60 billion on imported goods during an already crippling cost of living crisis? Well, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, can the West afford to be tough on China? Email us on gbviews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine has left Britain on course for a recession lasting more than a year. And inflation above 13%, the Bank of England has warned, as it raised interest rates for a sixth successive time. Andrew Bailey, the bank's governor, said they had no choice but to increase borrowing costs by 0.5 percentage points to 1.75%, blaming Russia for cost of living pressures not seen in more than 4 decades. And a 5% drop in living standards straddling this year and next, the biggest since records began in the 1960s. Well, I'm joined now by Shankar Singham, the CEO of Competair and former trade advisor to the UK International Trade Secretary. Shankar, what do you think the general public will notice first when it comes to inflation?
Hi, Deanna. Inflation is a significant and serious problem. I mean, you will see much higher prices. I mean, you already are seeing higher prices for things like food. Energy costs, obviously, as we all know, are going up. And partly this is because freight costs have gone up. There are many, many reasons for it, though. I mean, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is one reason, but that's only one reason. obviously the lockdowns and the fact that we had to close off the global economy for a couple of years is going to have a big impact, and it caused massive supply chain disruptions. So we saw the cost of a container, for example, coming from China to Europe went up from about $3,000 per container to $20,000 per container in 1 year. So that obviously is going to cause prices to go up. We've had a lot of regulatory interventions in the energy space that have led to higher energy costs. And because energy is part of everything, it's part of the food you eat, it's part of the steel we produce, it's a big part of every single thing we have, that will mean that prices will go up. So what we need to do now is to lower the cost in the system. And there are many ways of doing that to tackle inflation, but it's very important to understand the causes of it, because a significant cause was the shutdowns in the global supply chain. And what we are beginning to see now is some of those freight costs are starting to go down again. So in other words, the supply chain is starting to pick up. And actually, you'll see if you order stuff on the online platforms and so forth, you will probably start to see that things that took a long time to come to your doorstep are starting to arrive more quickly now, and that is a good sign. That means that freight costs are going down. So there will be some downward pressure, but what we need to do as a country, I think, is really focus on how we lower the costs of doing this. And that is not just about tax policy, it's not just about regulatory reform, it's about all of those things. It's about lowering the energy costs and having a sort of holistic solution to a lot of these things.
Things that I'm kind of interested in. You said there that understanding the kind of causes of this inflation is really important. Now, it strikes me that some of these are more kind of short-term issues, but is the UK economy kind of built to deal with these pressures? Do we need to be doing more kind of longer-term thinking about how we respond, let's say, in terms of energy or fuel?
Yeah, I think we do. I think what we need to be doing is looking at the cost of energy in the UK is significantly higher than many other places, many other OECD member countries. We need to look at why that's the case. We need to look at competition in the energy sector. We need to look at some of the regulatory interventions, some of the energy levies, the taxes and so forth, and see what we can do to lower those. Because if you don't get hold of energy cost, you will not be able to get hold of inflation. So I would certainly focus on that. I would focus on the regulatory reform agenda. We have an opportunity, obviously, having left the EU, to improve our domestic regulatory environment. It's taken us a while to actually get to this, but now we are here. We need to really accelerate those things. And regulatory reform is not easy. Whoever becomes the next Prime Minister will face a lot of vested interests, a lot of incumbent power of companies that don't want to change regulations because they benefit from the current status quo, and they don't want to see newer companies, insurgent companies, actually succeed. So it's not going to be easy to do regulatory reform, and it's going to require somebody who's able to really face down those powerful interest groups and so on and deliver it. But and tax obviously plays a very big role in this as well. And one of the things that I think is a problem in the way, and it's come up in the leadership debate, with so-called Treasury groupthink, I think it's been described as, there is a sort of macroeconomic consensus that you only look at these macroeconomic policy proposals. You only look at inflation. So we would have the same way of attacking inflation almost regardless of what has actually caused it. I believe that what we need to do is look at the microeconomic environment we're in. We need to be very focused on creating a dynamic economy in the UK. And right now, it's very hard for entrepreneurs to succeed because of the very high tax burden they face. And there's very much this view in the Treasury, I think, that if you are going to do some of these things, it has to be costed, it has to be paid for, taxes have to go up in order to pay for these things, or you can't do tax cuts because you're paying for some of these things. And that is, I think, the wrong way to look at this. It's a bit of a straw man argument. And we had this, some years ago when we talked about, it's either growth or austerity. That's the wrong way to look at this. You actually want to create wealth in your economy, and that means private sector economic growth. That's what you need to stimulate. Unfortunately, you get more of what you measure, and since GDP numbers actually include government spending as well as private sector economic activity, if you spend a lot of money, your GDP, reflects that. So we need to be very focused on those policies that will actually create wealth, that will actually grow the economy in terms of private sector economic activity. What's going to do that? Lower the regulatory burden, make the regulations more pro-competitive, so insurgent companies, newer companies, new businesses can be formed, the sort of creative destruction in the marketplace is able to work. Lower the tax burden on those businesses, so you allow them to succeed. And deal with the sort of lifeblood issues of the economy, which are things like energy cost, transportation cost, cost of housing, cost of land, these kinds of things. Because if you focus on these things with a sort of laser-like focus on these things, you will build for the long term. And your question was about how resilient the UK economy is. Well, I think if we do those things, we make ourselves much more resilient to shocks. If you look in terms of new business formation, at the FTSE index, you look at the top companies on the FTSE, they haven't really changed that much. If you looked by contrast at the Dow Jones top 30 companies, you look at them now, you look at them 10 years ago, you look at them 10 years before that, they're completely different companies. Why? Because that creative destruction has been allowed to work historically in the US. We need a bit more of that in the UK. We need that kind of dynamism in our economy. And, I used to work, with Rob Portman, who was the Director of Office of Management and Budget in the US, the person who really has their hand on the tiller of the US economy. And Rob used to say, look, a little bit of growth has an enormous impact. I mean, seas of red ink are washed away with a little bit of growth. And equally, if you see growth decline or worse, you're damaging growth, seas of red ink, start to form, and we drown in all of this. So it's really important to focus on wealth creation and do the things that will generate wealth, and do them right now. Don't wait to do them. Inflation will, we will be able to tackle inflation if we can do these things and lower the cost of all of these different aspects of our economy. We will make ourselves more dynamic, and as a result, we will avoid the recession that the Bank of England has projected.
Well, there was Shankar Singham there joining us, leading economists, to talk about inflation with a call to arms to make the UK economy much more dynamic. So I want to come back to my fabulous panel. Christine Hamilton, what did you make of what Shankar had to say there?
Well, I thought that was a pretty amazing party political broadcast on behalf of Liz Truss, basically, unless I missed some bits. She was basically supporting her line. But, I mean, serious inflation is a terrible, terrible evil for a lot of people at the lower end of the spectrum, people on fixed incomes. And, of course, it produces all these strikes in pursuit of wage demands, which will just rip through the public sector. We've got the railways, and I actually have some sympathy for the railway workers who are striking. I mean, they're not the ones who are on these sort of 80,000 a year, which is the headline figure you see screaming at you from some of the newspapers. These are the lower paid people. They need to completely rationalise the railways and get rid of a lot of these jobs. But the people who've got the jobs, they do deserve, I think, more. And the ports are now wanting more money. So it's a terrible evil. But he also talked, is he a professor?
I believe
he talked about the most important thing is growth and cutting taxes. Rishi Sunak, as I understand it, still wants to increase corporation tax from 18 to 25%. Why? Choking off businesses coming here. I mean, that seems to me an absolutely crazy move.
I think for me, it's giving businesses that signal as well, that you're going to be taxed more in a few years' time.
Exactly.
It's time to sort out your affairs and take your business elsewhere.
Extraordinary. I mean, when I was growing up, taxation was 98% in the pound. Income tax was 98% in the pound. I know it was. I know.
Medieval times.
It was. Yes, well, I am pretty old. But I mean, it was. And then, you know, the Thatcher government gets in and slashes it. I think, I can't remember, it was Nigel Lawson, I think, and the top rate went down to 40p in the pound, which is... Nobody was going to earn any extra money if they're going to be taxed at 98p in the pound. I promise you that's what it was.
Do you know, it's so peculiar. With Liz Truss, and she's pushing for a cut in corporation tax, as I understand. It's peculiar because there's a slight contradiction with what she's saying. On the one hand, she's saying Britain is such a great country that people want to come here just because it's so great. Yet on the other hand, she's saying, well, they're going to go elsewhere unless we cut taxes. I know I'm paraphrasing in a rather ugly manner, but it's one or the other. Either we're such a great country, businesses want to be here, regardless of the tax, as long as it's fair. I'm in business away from broadcasting, and my corporation tax, I think, is 19%, not 18%, but maybe my accountant will clarify that. And I think that I feel it would be fairer to actually pay a couple more quid, believe it or not, in corporation tax, because if I was employed, PAYE, I'd be paying 40% above a certain threshold. Now, with income tax, with corporation tax, I'm not. I'm currently being taxed 19%. I'm sure it's 19%.
I'm sure you're right.
Yeah, so I wouldn't disagree if Rishi Sunak... I think 25% is one hell of a hike, I really do. But I certainly wouldn't moan if I had to pay 22% tax.
Well, loads more to say. As ever, we need to get to the break because we've been having such chunky discussion, but do stick with us. Coming up, it's the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, can the West afford to be tough on China? China's amped up its military intimidation of Taiwan yesterday by firing ballistic missiles which flew over the island and landed in Japanese waters. But can the UK risk getting involved in the escalating tensions between China and Taiwan and potentially lose the opportunity to spend over £60 billion on imported goods during an already crippling cost of living crisis? Well, we'll get to that, but first it's the weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. If you're after rainfall, well, most places are not going to see any this weekend. Plenty of sunshine around, a chilly start, but things are turning warmer, more so as we go into next week. The dry weather, courtesy of this area of high pressure, but it isn't going to be dry everywhere. We do have this weather front approaching the northwest. That will bring some patchy rain across parts of Scotland tomorrow. Some rain in the form of showers this evening over eastern Scotland and northeast England. They're fading fairly rapidly. For most, it's a fine Friday evening with sunny spells leading into a dry and a clear night. But there's that weather front just bringing some rain across the Highlands and the Western Isles by dawn. That'll help to lift the temperatures here, but elsewhere, quite a chilly night actually, a fresh, comfortable night down into single figures in many places to start the weekend. So we start with blue skies and the sunshine will soon start to lift those temperatures, but it will be quite a grey morning for Scotland. Bit of patchy rain for Northern Ireland, and we'll see a few lightish showers spreading across the central belt at times, but staying fairly damp across the far north of Scotland. Temperatures here mid to high teens. If it brightens up in the east later, we might see 20 Celsius, but further south, easily over 20 degrees, 24, 25 across the southeast. So feeling pretty warm by the afternoon after that chilly old start. A bit more cloud splitting into northern England, small chance of a shower here and there on Saturday evening. We will keep further outbreaks of rain going over the Highlands, the Northern Isles and the Western Isles, but otherwise most places looking again dry as we head into Sunday. And again, certainly across the south, another day of lengthy spells of sunshine, and after a coolish start it'll be pretty warm by the afternoon. Always likely to keep some outbreaks of rain going across western Scotland, but a largely dry and bright day across Aberdeenshire down through to the borders, and here turning a bit warmer. Further south again, temperatures likely to get into the mid or even high 20s, and temperatures set to rise further next week.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello, you're with Deanna Davison here on GB News on TV and on digital radio. Well, it's time for our great British debate this hour. And I'm asking, can the West afford to be tough on China? China has amped up its military intimidation of Taiwan yesterday by firing ballistic missiles which flew over the island and landed in Japanese waters. As promised by the ruling Communist Party, 4 days of war games encircling Taiwan began just before 2 p.m, with wave after wave of rocket launches. Could the UK risk getting involved in the escalating tensions between China and Taiwan and potentially lose the opportunity to spend over £60 billion on imported goods during an already crippling cost of living crisis? So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, can the West afford to be tough on China? I'm also joined by Major General Chip Chapman. Thank you very much, Major General, for joining us today. Now, we've seen very similar instances of escalation with Russia's military practices near Ukraine prior to their invasion. Are these two situations conflated? And could the UK's involvement prevent any further escalation?
Well, they're not conflated together, but they're similar in the sense that we've always analysed China as we used to Russia in one of three ways. Are they a status quo power? Are they a defensive power? Or are they an expansionist power? We know the answer in Russia. And I think China's also shown its hand a bit too early. The real founder of modern China is not Mao Zedong, but in terms of how they've beng going the last 30 years, it's Deng Xiaoping. And they've shown their hand in terms of going against three of his fundamental principles: conceal your capabilities and avoid the limelight. They've not done that by their extreme, disproportionate and escalatory set of measures to Pelosi's visit. Be good at keeping a low profile. They've not been doing that, and they haven't secured their own position. Now, I don't think that means we're anywhere near war. And of course, the visit of Pelosi is not a casus belli, that which causes or justifies war. Neither do they have the capability to invade Taiwan at the moment. But there is a mutual dependency. That is, although they've called out the G7 ambassadors, for example, in saying that those military measures were disproportionate, it is the fact that £1 trillion worth of Chinese exports go to 5 of the G7 countries, and China cannot afford for that income stream to be broken or shut off. So there is this mutual dependency, and we really expected China to probably follow Sun Tzu in terms of their Belt and Road initiative, the way they're hoovering up both resources around the world to fuel and food is which is what they need. So the Supreme Act is to subdue the enemy without fighting. That's what we thought the Russians would do. Now that they've shown their hand, we can push back against that if we need to.
I find it really interesting, something you just said there, because often when we think about any conflict or sort of tension with China, we think about the downsides for the British economy in terms of what we would lose from those Chinese exports. But actually, you've said there that China would be equally worried about their loss of income.
Well, that's right. And this is potentially one of the pushbacks against globalization following COVID, when we saw the fragility of supply chain. So that needs to be looked at a strategic level as well as from the Chinese perspective. But all this was really teed up for me by what came out in the integrated review in 2021. It did state about the rising power of China and the need to push back against them. But China is very, very clear. Economic power is political power, and that's the way they will go to try and disrupt the sort of the international way of doing business at the moment and to become primus inter pares. They would like to see the yuan, the Chinese currency, taking over from the dollar as the central currency, and all that would go with that in terms of the influence and leverage that would give you in a global economy, of which they would run in both a digitally authoritarian way and in a humanly authoritarian way, as we've seen in the way that they treat the Uyghurs. And their pretty frightening call yesterday that the Taiwanese would need to be re-educated in the event of any reunification on Chinese terms.
Well, we've, of course, going to have a new Prime Minister in a few weeks' time, and both candidates seem to be relatively kind of hawkish when it comes to China. Do you think that's the right approach from Britain? Do you think we need to be tougher and demonstrate that we're tougher?
Well, I think you need a solidarity between all Western allies, the EU, to make sure that those who value democracy and freedom do push back against these authoritarian states. And as I said, to my mind, they've revealed their hand. And there is a way of going back to this because, China does need to do business in the international market. But we know what they're like now. The framework is there for us to deal with them. And we do need to push back if we want to maintain the international system post-World War II as it's been for the last 70 years and is being disrupted first by Russia and potentially in the future by China.
Thank you very much for your time and insight today. That was Major General Chip Chapman sharing his thoughts on whether the UK can afford to get tougher on China. Well, let's have a quick look at what you have been saying. Francis says we should start manufacturing our own goods in the UK instead of relying on China for their exports. Chloe says the UK cannot afford to be tough on China unless we increase our manufacturing capacity. Everything is either made in China or made from components that were made in China. Graham says Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan was irresponsible at best, considering what's happening in Ukraine. I believe she has stirred up a hornet's nest of anger towards the West. And David says the UK can afford to be tough on China. Just look at how they have dealt with Russia. Well, keep your views coming in. You're with me, Deanna Davison, on GB News, on TV and digital radio. Coming up, we'll continue our Great British debate. I'm asking, can the West afford to be tough on China? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and broadcaster Danny Kelly. But first, the latest news headlines with Tatiana.
It's 5:31. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Police have shot a man following an incident in southeast London. The officers were responding to reports of a person carrying a gun in Greenwich. He was treated at the scene before being airlifted to hospital. Police say there doesn't appear to be an ongoing threat to the public. Archie Battersbee's family have lodged an appeal after losing a High Court bid to have him transferred to a hospice. The 12-year-old, who's on life support, has been in a coma since April. This morning, a judge ruled it was not in Archie's best interest to relocate him from the Royal London Hospital. The two candidates hoping to be the next Tory party leader have clashed over the state of the economy. That's after the Bank of England warned the UK is facing its longest recession since the financial crisis in 2008. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak claims his rival's economic plan would damage the country. But Liz Truss argues her measures will tackle rising prices. A YouGov poll today has found that the majority of Britons believe Rishi Sunak would be the best candidate to end a recession. The Unite Union has announced nearly 2,000 workers at the port of Felixstowe will strike for 8 days in a dispute over pay. Members will walk out from the 21st of August after they failed to reach a deal with the Felixstowe Dock and Railway Company. It's the busiest and biggest container port in Britain and is thought to handle nearly half of all container trade in the UK. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.206 and 1.186 euros, and the price of gold currently stands at £1,469.70 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation. We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello, I'm Nana Davison covering for Nana today, and this is GB News on your TV and on your digital radio. Well, it's time for our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, can the West afford to be tough on China? China has amped up its military intimidation of Taiwan yesterday by firing ballistic missiles which flew over the island and landed in Japanese waters. But could the UK risk getting involved in the escalating tensions between China and Taiwan, and potentially lose the opportunity to spend over £60 billion on imported goods during an already crippling cost of living crisis? So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, can the West afford to be tough on China? Well, let's see what my panel make of this. Author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and broadcaster Danny Kelly. Christine, I'm going to come to you first this time. What did you make of what Chip Chapman had to say there?
Well, I don't think we can afford not to get tough on China. I mean, China and Russia simply do not share our global view of the way the world should be run. I mean, they are deeply opposed to everything that the Western world believes in. So we cannot afford not to be tough on them. If we had been slightly tougher when Russia marched into Crimea, maybe we wouldn't have had the terrible situation that we've now got in Ukraine. And I think we have to stand up for Taiwan, whether Nancy Pelosi was right to go. I mean, one of your viewers said she'd stirred up a bit of a hornet's nest. Well, I mean, she has, but she likes grandstanding. But Taiwan has been a sort of totem and a prestige item ever since 1949, when Chiang Kai-shek set up the independent state, and they want it back, just like Ukraine and Russia. So it's the Putin and Xi or she, have both got these absolute totems that are a matter of pride. But we can't afford to cut China off completely because they supply, I don't know what percentages, but a massive amount of lithium and other minerals that we desperately need for all our batteries and stuff. And if we're going to continue pursuing this ridiculous green nonsense all the time, the green levy, we need more and more batteries to fund all the electric cars. So I think it's very, very difficult. But I do think we have ideologically to get really tough on China and make them understand where we stand. And we stand with the United States and the West and not with them and Russia.
I think it's those fundamental principles of believing in democracy and freedom, isn't it, that we absolutely need to defend. Danny?
Yeah, it's peculiar. I don't know whether I'm falling for Trump's sales pitch about being a strong leader. And would Trump have sent the equivalent of Pelosi over to Taiwan? I don't know. Maybe I'm falling...
I think she just went on her own, didn't she? I don't think Biden sent her.
Oh, no, you've got to get permission from Joe Biden. You can't just jump on... I think she was on the presidential plane, wasn't she? Was she on Air Force One or something? Oh, no, you can't just... I mean, that Labour MP got sacked for giving an interview to Sky News unilaterally. You can't just jump on a plane without the top man knowing. I don't know whether President Xi would be behaving like this, but one thing that we've learned over the last 8 months, it's been 8 months in Ukraine, blimey, is that sanctions work. Prior to sanctions were often questioned as to whether that they were effective, the efficacy of them. But we know that sanctions work. And China, we are so dependent on China, but that's a mutual dependency. Because I think one of the guests said there's $1 trillion dependency, but that's mutual. You know, we can stop exports, we can interfere with their banking system. They've got banking systems all around the Western world. And I don't think that President Xi is a loony. I worry about Putin. I think Putin's unhinged. I really do, with his expansionism, trying to get back to 1939 or 19... whatever it was.
I quite agree that Putin's unhinged, but I'm afraid I don't think he's the only one who's unhinged in the Russian hierarchy. And if something happens to Putin, and there are all these rumours that he's got some terminal disease, there will be plenty of others to take his place.
Yeah, but we're talking about Xi today.
Yeah.
So I think Putin's a loony. I really do. And you can't debate and reason with unhinged loonies. But Xi, you know, I don't think he's a loony. I think he's an unpleasant man. Look at the way they're treating the
Uyghur Muslims.
Yeah. Oh, what a horrible individual. But sometimes you have to pinch your nose when dealing with horrible individuals. And I know that we all want to live in a world which is democratic, which is a liberal world where you can be who you are. But also, history tells us that when you start interfering with countries who don't hold those values, look at Afghanistan. Look at the disaster that we've been left with. Sometimes we have to pinch our nose and accept that some people are unpleasant.
You have to be practical as well. But, I mean, I don't think China... The comparison between Ukraine and Taiwan, walking into Ukraine with tanks, or going into Ukraine with tanks, was one thing. I think that Taiwan is armed to the teeth, and I think it would be utterly ridiculous and foolish to try and do that. But, you know, apparently half of the shipping comes through the straits between Taiwan and China. I've temporarily forgotten the name. I mean, it's an incredibly important part of the world. We can't afford to let that be jiggered around by the Chinese.
Do you
think we do have to hold our nose? You're quite right.
Do you think in this country, because China is geographically so far away, whereas Ukraine feels like it's on our neighbourhood, do you think there's so much kind of less awareness and less concern about it?
I'm sure that's right, because Ukraine feels like us, it's Europe, you know, whereas China doesn't. But China's tentacles are now so far enmeshed. They take over companies in countries all over Southern Africa and goodness knows what. And the Major General mentioned the Belt and Road plan, which has been incredibly successful, and there's about 146 countries are part of it, and I mean they really, and you're quite right about.
That's twice in a minute you've accepted me being right.
Well, no,
there's not much disagreement going on today, is there? Really?
You mentioned that we could spy on them, but I actually sort of somehow feel that they would be much more aggressive in spying on us and disrupting our cyber systems.
I never mentioned cyber systems.
Yes, you did. You might not have called them cyber systems, but you talked.
OK.
Well, should we bring in some voices from our viewers?
Voice of reason.
Well, as we know, this show is nothing without you and your views. So let's welcome one of our great British voices. This is your opportunity to be on the show and tell us what you really think about the topics that we're discussing. And this hour, we're heading over to Hull to speak to Dan Bryan. Dan, thank you for joining us today. What do you make of this? Do you think we need to be tougher on China, or do you think we need to be careful?
I think it's one of those situations where it's a little more nuanced than what we can possibly achieve in a 5 or 10 minute debate. But going back to the debate between Christine and Danny when they were saying about Putin being completely unhinged, I agree with Danny there that Putin seems on the surface to be completely unhinged. But the problem we've got with Xi is that he is the very calculated, very calm and very charming psychopath. So we have to deal with them with kid gloves and actually very carefully. And for America to be sending that incontinent pterodactyl Nancy Pelosi over there is only going to stir up more trouble when we should actually be looking to work with them and not against them.
So do you think that the US should have been working with their allies more on helping Taiwan rather than just going out there all guns blazing?
Absolutely, but America does this. I mean, it's been doing this for years. The situation in the Ukraine hasn't been helped by 8 years ago when NATO, we deposed a democratically elected president in the Ukraine and replaced him, which was reported at the time. And all that did was serve to anger Russia. I think The Guardian reported that at the time. So although we pretend to be doing things in a defensive manner, sometimes in the West we're actually quite offensive with the way we go about doing things. Sometimes it's better to seek a diplomatic solution. But like what Christine and Danny have just been saying, if you're dealing with psychopaths and sociopaths, then what can you possibly do? I'm at a loss when there are huge weapons involved.
Mm-hmm. I think many of us are, to be honest, Dan. Well, Dan, thank you for coming on and sharing your insights today. That was Dan Bryan joining us from Hull to share his views on whether the UK needs to get tougher on China, whether we can afford to get tough on China. And lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Gary says the government need to focus on our domestic agenda and stop worrying about what's happening on another continent. Saul says we must respond to China in the same way we did with Russia. We cannot look weak on the international stage. Ross says China can't keep being allowed to throw their weight around. Something must be done. And Oscar says getting involved in the China conflict would prove very costly. And with a recession looming, I think the risk is too high. Barry says we don't need to be tough in China. We just need to stop dealing with them and produce all that stuff we import from them ourselves in the UK. Start up our own manufacturing industries again. Well, do keep your views coming in. We've got a little bit of time left, which means it is time for our quickfire debates, the part of the show where we discuss some of the other stories making the headlines. Well, joining me today, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and broadcaster Danny Kelly. So on to the first story. Migrants who have been convicted of a criminal offence will be required to scan their faces up to 5 times a day using smartwatches installed with facial recognition technology under plans from the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice. So should foreign offenders continue to be monitored at this level after release? Danny, your thoughts?
Yes, and I can hear the boos and the chorus of dismay from the lefty lawyers that Boris Johnson referred to a couple of months ago. Yes, why not? We don't know who they are. I'm assuming that 99.9% of them, they bin their passports in the sea. Why are they doing that? So yes, I mean, potentially they are a threat. Even if they're not a threat to the country, why not? We need to know who they are. They are here at this point illegally. I don't see a problem with that. I don't see a human rights issue with it. Okay, we don't need to keep hold of the data. We can destroy the data once we decide whether their status is permissible. I don't see the problem. But yes, I can understand why all of the lefty lawyers will object to it. Personally, I don't see an issue.
Christine?
Well, I shouldn't think there are many lefty lawyers watching GB News, so the eruption won't come just yet.
It'll be on Twitter later.
100% agree with it. We all get used to facial recognition now, don't you? You turn on your phone and all sorts of things. You just hold it up to your face and bingo, and you go through passport control and everything with facial recognition. It's not a problem. And if you've, why not? You mentioned a very crucial point about if they are proved to be innocent in the end and wipe all the records. But why? If you've done nothing wrong, if you're not guilty, you wouldn't have any concern about that.
Well, that one's settled. That was a resounding yes.
I would like to have heard a bit
today.
more about from Rishi and Liz, if I can call them that, be so familiar, about that sort of thing. We haven't heard enough about what you might call the side issues to the economy. A little bit more about immigration, please.
Yeah, there's been some bits from both camps, but I think economy's been
enough.
dominating so much, hasn't it? Well, let's move on to quickfire debate number 2. Suella Braverman has attacked the diversity industry for painting her as a victim of white privilege because of her background. The Attorney General said the patronising training given to civil servants would assume she must be oppressed because she's an ethnic Asian woman with working class roots. She described the courses as brainwashing and said that taxpayers' money should instead be spent on making sure passports and driving licences are issued quickly. So, does she have a point? Christine?
I didn't know anything about that story, so that's the first I'd heard of it. Yes, of course she does. I mean, and the other side of that coin is that we're a very white panel. We are all guilty of white privilege. That's the reverse of that sort of patronising attitude. So, no, absolutely. Hole in one to Suella.
Is there not a small argument, though, that diversity is a good thing? Should we be promoting it more, or does the focus need to be on merit first within the civil service?
Everything should be done on merit, frankly, and I think these diversity targets are absolutely absurd, and you end up with the wrong people in the wrong jobs. You know, people should get their job, whatever it is, large or small, public-facing or not, on merit, and we shouldn't have these diversity targets. It's absurd.
The world has changed how we look at diversity since the murder of George Floyd. I've never known anything like it. That poor bloke's death has changed, has had sweeping ramifications around the world. And, Deanna, your point about is it positive to have a representation of diversity? Of course it is. But I believe in meritocracies. But then the counter-argument is that there's an element of levelling up. Now, look, I'm going to go off on a tangent. Just look at the adverts on the telly. I was in a pub the other week and I overheard someone saying it's like we're living in Nigeria. You know, you see so many... And look, I'm as liberal a guy as you'll ever meet. But there is a point where people are getting fed up with it being rammed down their throat. Because as soon as you object, people say, well, what are you objecting for? Are you racist?
You're racist.
No, I'm not racist. But I want you to sell me a bag of chips. I don't expect you to be activists when it comes to multiculturalism. And you see it in the Home Office and the civil service.
It's also well known that large numbers of people regularly overestimate the number of ethnic minorities that there are in this country. It doesn't matter what the group is. You ask the average person, you know, how many people of colour, black people, Asians, whatever it is, and they all overestimate it, sometimes by as much as 10, 15%.
Because for a lot of people, multiculturalism hasn't worked. You go to the city centres. I've driven down from Warwick, half an hour away from Birmingham. There are inner city areas of Birmingham which have just changed the term white flight. Now, you have to ask yourself, you know, if multiculturalism is such a success, how come that there are hardly any people from 1960s onwards who are still white, English, Anglo-Saxon, Brummies, whatever you want to call them, and how come there are hardly any? There's a handful. So for a lot of people, multiculturalism isn't working.
I reckon we could fill a whole show talking about this topic.
Well,
But this is quick fire. Quick fire, so we're going to move on to our next debate, which is Parliamentary Standards Commission has concluded that Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has breached the MP's Code of Conduct, not once, not twice, but 8 times. He was accused of being late to declare earnings and gifts from a variety of sources. Starmer has apologised for the inadvertent error. So should Sir Keir Starmer do more than just apologise, or is an apology enough? Danny?
Once again, you MPs.
Oh, we're all the same.
Scandalous.
We're all the same.
Have you declared all of your presents? And what? Oh, I bet you get a lot of presents as well. You're a very likeable individual.
Not loads, not loads.
I think it's important that if you're the leader of a party, particularly who at the dispatch box tries to interrogate successfully sometimes and tries to degrade your opposition, then you need to be white to the white. For a casual expression. And you need to not have any skeletons in your closet. So all of a sudden, these 8 individual gifts that he was late declaring, one of them could have been a can of brute deodorant for all I know. But it's important that if you're going to have a go at people for breaking the rules, no matter how petty, you need to make sure that you abide by the rules.
Well, I mean, it is delicious, you know, Mr. Holier Than Thou has been caught out. But to be perfectly honest, when you look at the list of these things, sometimes he was sort of 2 or 3 days late in declaring trip to the call it Wimbledon or whatever it was, and you just think, does this really matter in the great scale of things? But I quite agree, if you're going to be holier than thou and throw everything at other people. But, I mean, they are pretty minor infractions, as a matter of fact, and he needs to boot somebody up the backside in his office who failed to do it in time. There must be somebody there whose job ought to be, the minute it happens, register it.
Well, I have a guy called Jack, and he is absolutely on top of it at all times.
Good old Jack.
Good old Jack. Well, final topic for the day. The Chief Executive Officer of Thames Water has been given a rather generous bonus of just under £500,000. All the meanwhile, Thames Water is being criticised for drought worries. So does anyone deserve a £500,000 bonus? Christine?
No, certainly not at the head of a water company at the moment. No, absolutely not.
Well, that was a nice, easy one.
Easy one, yes.
A disagreement at the final hurdle. I'm a red-blooded capitalist, and I believe that if he wasn't worthy of a £500,000 pay rise, the shareholders wouldn't accept it. So, yes, we're about to have a drought. That's not all his fault. Yes, we got leaky pipes. That is his fault. So I'm on the other side. So the shareholders won't put up with a £500,000 bonus if it's not merited.
Christine, quick response.
Well, if he merits it, I don't know the details. OK, if he merits it, yes, but I find it difficult to believe that he does, frankly.
Well, finally, a bit of disagreement in our quickfire debates today. Well, on today's show, we've been asking, who do you trust to be our next Prime Minister? We've had a Twitter poll running, and according to it, 89% of you say Liz Truss and 11% say Rishi Sunak. Well, thank you for voting in that poll. Thank you for getting involved today. And, of course, a huge thank you to my panel, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and broadcaster Danny Kelly for joining me today. Thank you at home for your company. I think we've had some chunky debates, we've had some chunky topics, and I've really appreciated your insights, I've appreciated your emails, and thank you. It's the first time I've been on this show. Thank you for treating me so warmly. But right now, I will leave you with the weather forecast. Have a lovely Friday.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. If you're after rainfall, well, most places are not going to see any this weekend. Plenty of sunshine around, a chilly start, but things are turning warmer, more so as we go into next week. The dry weather, courtesy of this area of high pressure, but it isn't going to be dry everywhere. We do have this weather front approaching the northwest. That will bring some patchy rain across parts of Scotland tomorrow. Some rain in the form of showers this evening over eastern Scotland and northeast England. They're fading fairly rapidly. For most, it's a fine Friday evening with sunny spells leading into a dry and a clear night. But there's that weather front just bringing some rain across the Highlands and the Western Isles by dawn. That'll help to lift